Why not? It's YouTube. We are live. Welcome to the first of the Misaligned podcast, featuring the kings of intellectual discourse from the African diaspora, Jab, Yemi, Just Farouk, and the Cross himself. Right. So we're here to talk about things from a slightly different perspective. But before we even talk about, let's talk about who we are, why we're here. What does this even mean? And I'm going to hand this over to you, Jab. Right. Why don't you start telling us a little bit about yourself and the history about how we started all of this discourse, the logo, what this all means to you, and where we're trying to get to.
I think it's a cultural thing, isn't it?
Okay, thank you. So, my name is Jab. So all four of us met at various times on the internet, and we become very good friends, and we have very lively conversations. I think we are aligned, but also misaligned on a lot of subjects across geopolitics, history, philosophy, and a host of other subjects. And what we found during the course of our friendship and very, didactic interactions was that there are perhaps a lot of people who are Africans, that is, that we have interacted with. We have found that people hold perhaps a particular view of religion or geopolitics, if I may use that, in Africa, which is kind of mainstream. And what we thought we would do is set up a group like this so that we can have a conversation that challenges the normative wisdom, as it were. And obviously, this is our first meeting, and I will let the others, excuse me, speak. But the focus going forward is going to be so the main focus, I think, going forward is focusing on geopolitics, with particular emphasis hopefully on Africa, but we're not restricted to Africa. I'll let the others speak, and hopefully I can dot the I's and cross the T's later on. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jab. I mean, I'm already misaligned with you because I'm already thinking about some other things I want to be discussing, but we'll get there. Have you got any thoughts of your own? Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit and then maybe talk a little bit about your thinking, high level?
So what was that me next, did you say?
Go for it.
Right. Okay. So thanks, guys, and thanks anyone who's joined us online. I am pleased to be here personally, and as Jab said, we're four guys who've run into each other, one way or the other, and we've had interesting conversations. And certainly, from my point of view, just to add to what Jab said, I think I kind of, what he said, just not to repeat all of that, but just kind of add to that would be that there are lots of this sort of conversations happening everywhere. But what I think we recognize more or less is that there might be not enough, certainly from our point of view, of this conversation is happening from the perspective of the African. So it's not just whether we talk about African issues or wider issues, but from the perspective of an African. And that's not to suggest that there's one African perspective. I think there are lots of African perspectives. There might be as many African perspectives as there are African persons, but it matters what those perspectives are. And I think, in a sense, four of us would have would be able to represent 4 of those perspectives, which sometimes, often are aligned and sometimes not so aligned. In other words, misaligned. But yeah, that's my sort of understanding of how and why we're here.
Nice one. That is great introduction as well on that one. And Farouk, Farouk, it's up to you to
Yeah,
just be yourself or to just be just Farouk.
yeah,
Go for it.
just
It's your turn.
yeah. Thank you, Jab, Yemi, and Cross. I'm pleased to be here, and thanks to everyone that has joined us online. At Not to repeat what the other two, what Yemi and Jab has said. We met at various times, and we've known each other over sometimes decades. And we've often had conversations about the meaning of truth, reality, geopolitics, religion, philosophy. And these conversations were not superficial. We were open to challenge previously held beliefs, embrace diversity, nuances, disagree. And as we continue to explore these issues of mutual interest to ourselves, what became clear was that even though we shared a lot as friends, as professionals, and as Africans, there was divergence in the understanding, operationalizing, and expression of this, of what's true, of values, of perspectives. Essentially, we were misaligned in spite of very clear commonalities, and that inspired our the name of the podcast. And if Cross can display our logo, and I think this realization of misalignment was not seen as something of a sort of division. Rather, we saw it as a sort of strength, embracing diversity, embracing complexity, embracing nuances, and embracing learning. And hence, our logo is it visually captures this concept. The microphone there is talking about adding our voice to the global discourse from our perspective, of over 1 billion Africans, but then hopefully to reflect our commonalities and divergence on all of the issues we cover on here. Thanks. Thank you. That's all from me.
Fantastic. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, good. Fantastic. I mean, that's great, and that just turns quite nicely back to me. So, me, who am I? Who am I? What's Cross about? And then how do I fall into this misalignment that we're all misaligned, right? So, well, I'm Cross. I ran into Jab. First time we ran into him was an automatic misalignment. We had our first interaction was highly contentious, and it was great because we were two different people from two different worlds, right? And then we just jammed in this world where we had two different views about everything, and it was accidental, to coin a phrase. How we met was essentially an actual accident. We actually had an accident, and it was quite interesting because we had conversations about things, and even from the get-go it was quite clear that we had a connection from an intellectual perspective. And even though it was quite interesting to see how we had different viewpoints, but we're able to still have the conversation and get to a middle ground. And it was quite clear to me already from there that this is someone that, in my mind, was, special, and it was worth having that conversation with. I've been having intellectual discourses about all sorts of things over the years: philosophical conversations, general intellectual conversations, religious conversations, political conversations. And it's been very difficult to get a group of people that I could sit down in the room, like these three very interesting individuals in this call. We'll get to that in a minute about why they're particularly interesting. But being able to get to the point where I could have these conversations, all sorts of conversations, with a group of individuals from a very similar background, very similar heritage, to be able to deliver specific messages to ourselves, but also to others who are listening and being involved in these conversations. And that became very clear to me fairly recently when we had a conversation, myself and Jeff had a conversation post our initial interaction. And then we had a couple more conversations. We kept talking. It was interesting to see how we were on the same wavelength. And then he mentioned actually there's a couple of other people we could talk to that might be interesting to talk. Come and have a conversation with these guys. You know what I mean? And said maybe it might be interesting if you come and join us to talk. Let's have have a maybe we can one or two things. You know what I mean? And then we talked for 6 hours. I don't know if you guys were calculating the time or you guys were listening to that clock on. It was 6 hours that we were there talking about everything from geopolitics to religion to just general intellectual pursuits, conversations about intellect, professional pursuits, etc. All of it. We're doing all of these things. And in my mind, it was very clear to me already. We talked about this previously, but at that point, it's clear to me that we need to have this conversation on a different stage. Let's involve others. Let's take this conversation outside, because not just because we had different viewpoints, because we did. We're very misaligned when we're having these conversations. And then we had multiple people, even when we were there, sat at that dinner table, because we had, for everyone's own, for everyone's perspective, if anyone's listening to this, we were sat at a dinner table. We had dinner first. And during that dinner, we're talking. And it was interesting to see how we'd be having these different conversations. And there were different people across that table that were aligning to different viewpoints. Different people were agreeing with different ideas that different people were saying at different points in time. It wasn't based on personalities. Oh, I know you. This is my guy. So the conversation is good for you. No, it was misaligned based on the different particular ideologies that we're having, the particular viewpoints that we're raising, and the particular intellectual curiosities that we're generating with our conversations. And we're talking about everything. We're talking about everything from base level philosophical concepts to really complex political positions. And we're getting different opinions from other people. And I thought, this is a group of people I would enjoy talking to. And not just talking to personally, talking to in a public forum. And I think for me, this was a key thing. Getting out there to have these conversations and being able to discuss these things in a forum that allows us to be able to get others' opinions as well. That was our general binding piece within that piece. But I think it's also important to talk a little bit about our journeys. And I'll probably start with mine. And we can go back and go through each other as well. Just go person by person and then just talk a little bit about ourselves and how do we get here, so people can, when people decide to watch this at some point, they can relate to us. So maybe I'll start with myself. So start with me when I was a kid, and line this up into, again, some of the misalignment that not necessarily that I have with the general group, but also with society and some of the norms that exist across this piece. So I grew up in a highly militaristic background. Everything was very structured, but at the same time, not very structured. My dad was a soldier, so he had a background within the military, within the Nigerian Air Force specifically. So I grew up with quite a lot of rigor, quite a lot of structure around it. For example, when I was, 8 or 9, I had to start doing 50 words a day. So my mom would go to the office or go to work, wherever she was going, and then she'll come back and say, you have to have 50 words written out and the definitions done by the time I get back from work. And I had to have those 50 words done, the definitions ready. And I had to cram everything. And it was good because that was every single day. Very structured, very regimented. So I needed to understand all of these things. And I hated it because I'll be sitting there thinking, oh God, mommy's coming back again. Oh my God, she's back at 4 o'clock and I've only done 25 words. I'm in trouble, And then it was that kind of background around how I needed to make sure I was constantly learning. Whether I was learning words, whether I was learning mathematics, whether I was doing bits and pieces around dancing, or whether I was doing things because I used to do drums, I used to do acting, all sorts of stuff. I worked I had to do bits around music, so piano. I had to learn piano, very specific targets and stuff like that. So my background pushed me into a situation where I had to be very good at anything I was doing. Automatically, I decided to be very bad at everything I was doing because I was like, I'm going to revolt. I'm not getting involved in everything. I hate you, dad. I hate you, mom. I'm not doing any of this stuff. I'm not getting involved. And it was interesting looking through my life in that one. I went to a school called King's College Secondary School uh, in in Lagos, Nigeria. I went to secondary school, which was again very interesting because you go through a boys' school and boys are being boys, doing boys' things. I went to Unilag first, studied law for a little bit, and I couldn't handle that. It was just very distracting, highly disruptive, but I really enjoyed what I was doing. Lots of information, lots of knowledge. Then I started becoming a bad boy, and Unilag made me a very bad boy. So I said, I'm not going to do that one. Let me go and change my life and become something slightly different. And then I went um, into Covenant University, which is a university in Nigeria, highly Christian, highly structured, very Christian university, which allowed me to really focus on religion and make sure I could start building that foundation. Coming back to this conversation, this is going to be one of the topics we're going to talk about in one of the podcasts for sure, was my questions around religiosity and the authenticity of religion. That made me start questioning.
I'll go get the cereal.
I spent quite a lot of time really studying religion, and not just religion in terms of the Bible, but studying religion in terms of the practices, the foundations around it, the people around religion, etc. And then post that, I did a bit of work in Nigeria for a little bit, NYSC or National Youth Service Corps, which is a fundamental part of being Nigerian. You have to do this when you're done with your first degree, if you decide to work or have any kind of employment of any kind of validity in Nigeria. And then I came to England to do my master's. They have a master's in international business and management. Graduated from the school of University of Bradford School of Management with distinction because again I was just all over on that focus and getting things done the way things needed to be. And then I decided to stay in the UK. I got a job. I wasn't really interested in it, but someone challenged me again. And I was again misaligned in this context of people saying, well, you can't get a job in the UK. It's too difficult. It's very hard to work in the UK. They're racist, they're discriminatory, etc. And I said, no, I don't necessarily believe this is the case. I always take up a challenge, and that's exactly what I did. I took up the challenge, started working. After a year, I started thinking, well, why am I even here? I just did this because somebody said you can't do it. I got a job here, I'm working here. Do I really want to stay here? Well, I kind of did. I enjoyed it compared to the restrictions I had in Nigeria. So I decided to stay and I carried on. And again, this allowed me to start challenging quite a few different norms. Things around racism started showing up. Conversations around, well, does being black hamper you? Being black is one thing. Does being a foreign national hamper you as well? If you're someone else that comes here with a different accent, does that make your life more difficult? And I started challenging that status quo and saying, well, if that's what we think as a people, well, maybe I need to find out if that is actually true. And if it is true, can I change it? My assessment, we can come to that in another podcast, obviously, and talk about that in a bit more detail. But my assessment rings true around that one. And it'll be good to hear what your thoughts are on this as well. But without taking up all of the mic, I'm going to hand this over as well. Let's just get someone else's own background story as well. I want to hear your villain origin story too. You know what I mean? So, Jab, I'm going to hand over to you again and hear what you have to say
Okay.
for this one and give us a bit about your history and your villain story.
Okay, so I'll try and see if I can make this brief. Well, maybe we should actually just say that myself and the others are medical doctors. We're all four of us are Nigerians. I come from northern Nigeria, and my family, everything I'm going to say is really intentioned because there will be a reason why these things are relevant later. So, half of my family is Muslim, the other half is Christian, and at some point we were Catholics, and then we became, Pentecostals or evangelical. And personally, I had someone a very close friend died in school, and that led to a series of questions. Why did this person die? Why are we here? And all of those things. The end result of that is that I became agnostic and I stopped going, gave up religion altogether. And I became quite evangelical about, later on, that is about my agnosticism. And in that context, I felt that religion was a, a malignant thing. In Africa, it destroys the psyche, it makes us quite superstitious, and it affects our development. But whilst I was on that mission, I started to ask, why are some countries poor and others rich? And I read various books, looked at different theories, and a lot of these are things like, geography is a problem. We're very comfortable because the weather is fantastic, whereas in places like Europe and America, weather is not good. Therefore, people have had to innovate and all of that kind of business. So there's geography. Other people say, oh, actually, Africans are just, lazy. They just like partying and just jumping around and getting married and all of that. So that's why they're poor. Other people say, oh, it's because they're lazy. Then it's called the name escapes me, but I think it means something like the evangelical work ethic or Pentecostal work ethic. The exact phrase escapes me, but essentially it's saying that Protestant work ethic, I think that's what it's called. So all of those theories, and it got to the point where I started to think that actually Africans are, I did believe this at one point, that Africans are genetically inferior to the white races, and Europe and all of those. And I held that view for some time until I happened upon an article written by a Canadian philosopher or someone of that sort of description. It's in a publication called Walrus. Now the title is "The Conspiracy Against Africa," and for the first time, I was presented with a different view or a different explanation, or for why Africa might be, why some countries are poor and others are rich. And for the first time, I was introduced to the concept of colonialism. So I started to look at that and how religion obviously feeds into that. So as a result of that, I embarked on self tutoring. I read quite a bit of history. I still read a lot of history, started to understand geopolitics, and then began to understand that actually the media is not there to inform you. It's not there to educate you. It's actually there to misinform you because there are forces that rely on keeping you ignorant because that benefits them. So these issues we'll be discussing in due course, but in general, that's kind of where how I have journeyed till this point. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's very interesting. I'm quite curious to understand a little bit more about that. I forget the word you were alluding to it. Ethnos. It's almost genetic superiority, but it'll be interesting to hear a little bit more about that one at some point. I'm sure we're
Yeah,
going to get to a
yeah,
few more contentious
yes,
topics. But obviously, we're
yes,
still at the
yes.
introductory phases. And if anyone's again, just put this out. If anyone's watching, and if you've got questions, feel free. I can see there's a couple people watching now. If you've got any thoughts or opinions or any questions, feel free to comment. We can see your comments, and then we can highlight them. If you've got any questions to ask or any opinions to raise, just feel free to just put them in the comments. So with that, I'll hand over now as well to Just Farouk to give us your own thoughts, your own background, your origin villain story about you becoming Batman. So let's hear your views.
Thank you, Cross. I didn't start out political at all. If anything, I was just a curious young boy who would binge on any, and I repeat, any information. Um, I read everything I could lay my hands on. My dad's encyclopedia, his history books. Geography and history were my childhood interests, and I'll just read and binge on them. And so that's the driver, curiosity. But then growing up in a Muslim home with very religious parents, I was brought up within the framework of the Islamic thought and framework for living. Essentially, discipline, responsibility, consequence, punishment. And those were my initial frameworks. And then satellite TV came to Nigeria, History Channel, Natural Geographic. And then I binged on the narratives there. I remember the first Gulf War, watching it on mainstream media, BBC, CNN, and being in absolute awe of Western power. But at that time, beginning to question the moral justification for such use of force so far away from home. As technology advanced, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter democratized narratives, and I became exposed to a wider perspective, again, driven by curiosity, challenging ideas and narrative that I had accepted. Again, nothing political, but just questioning things. And at this point, still in the Nigerian bubble, but beginning to question things. I arrived London about, obviously went to medical school where I met Yemi. I've known him for decades, if I'll put that out there. And then coming to London was where I began to recognize, putting my curiosity with my geography and history lessons, beginning to see how geography, history, politics came together, geopolitics, colonialism, why nations were rich and poor, racism. And that's where the political thought and the politicization of my mind began. It was when I began to explore those issues. It was when I began to use frameworks at length all of my life to question how things were and why they were. So really, I'm at a point now where I am a blend of influences, my Western mind, my childhood, my curiosity, the frameworks at length. And I will bring in all of that into addressing the issues we discuss here from my own journey and my own perspective. I would like to think of myself as an untrained philosopher as well. I question reality, I question the nature of truth, I question values and perspectives. And with as I learn new frameworks, I go back and look at everything I've learned, and they are not the same. They don't mean the same. They don't, both in meaning and in my realization of what's true and what's untrue. It constantly changes. And again, in a sense, that's a personal misalignment, isn't it? The meaning it held 10 years ago is different from the meaning it holds today, obviously, as new frameworks emerge and as I learn and unlearn and relook at things. So, yeah, so essentially, that's my evolution. That's my story. And what I will bring into the podcast is leveraging all of that framework, all of that mindset into the issues we discuss here. Thank you.
I mean that makes a lot of sense. It's and again, to me it sounds quite interesting if you're listening to the different levels or the different levels of involvement in specific things across our different experiences. It's quite interesting to hear that difference in background and concentration as well. And Yemi, you're about to bring your own suya to this spice. You know what I mean? You're about to add your own meat to this soup. So I'm about to hear your own opinions and your own background and your own origin story for this one.
Well,
As per Superman, you know.
Yeah, my feeling is that you guys have set the bar that high that my story is probably going to not sound very interesting, but there's quite a number of similarities there, I'd say. And I had a normal childhood in Nigeria. Had fun as a child, did all the things children do, played a lot of football, still do now, can't believe it. But I've always been a curious person. I don't think I can put a finger on what sparked that curiosity. I think I've always, like Farouk said of himself, I've always liked to read. I read all the volumes of encyclopedia that we had at home, all the science books, everything I could lay my hands on. But I also went to a boarding school, and I went to Federal Government College, Minna, and this was a few hundreds of miles away from home where I grew up in Ilorin. And I remember showing up in school as an 11-year-old. I was excited going. I remember, doing all the shopping with my parents, and it just felt like a thrilling thing that you're going somewhere, you've got all these new things. But I showed up in school, and as they were, we've sort of done all the preliminaries, and I watched them walk to the car, and like they were driving home. Suddenly the reality dawned on me that this is not fun. Like, they're going to drive away and leave you here. Like, that had never happened before then. And okay, I took comfort straight away in playing football, because there was this guys I met straight away, and they was like, oh, let's just go play football. And that kind of distracted me. And we played football. I remember that evening vividly. And after playing football, you kind of, all dusty and dirty. I needed to have a shower, and then they showed me the bathroom. Like, you're joking. Not this one. It was very different from home. And I think one of my comforts going forward then, because I had to find a way to survive. And one of the things that I just fell back on to was just reading. It took my mind away from everything. I just read and read and read and read, and I just read everything I could lay my hands on. But my interest has always changed again. So this is something to say about me. I've always been interested in many different things over time. I've been interested in science, in religion, in theology, in armchair philosophy, like as Farouk mentioned. And I've taken an interest in a lot of things. But I think at the minute, a lot of my interests are around what the nature of reality is. And I think that's a very big thing. And it incorporates everything. And so, as you would find, I am interested in geopolitics. I don't necessarily have as much of a burning passion for it as the other members of this group might do, but I do have an interest in it, partly because I see how those issues fit into the wider sort of sense of reality of our existence. I'm sort of interested in existential issues. Why do people suffer, both at individual levels and at group levels? And I also feel that my thinking about how life should be at present is that we are here basically to, in a sense, make things better in any way that we can. So, if in my little corner of the world, if I can make life a little bit easier for myself or the person next door, next to me, whoever that is, and then that would be a worthwhile pursuit. Again, this is not it's not a scientific claim. It's a sort of axiomatic claim, and I think most people would instinctively agree with that. And so that's the perspective that I take, and that's how I come into this. And I think that's how our conversations have become very interesting, because instinctively we agree with that it's all about using conversations to understand life better, and in effect making life better if we can, in that sense. So that's where I come from. There are a few other things that you might find that I'm very interested in, and there's a reason for that. We'll come to them later. So with regards to the nature of reality, and again, when we sat on the dinner table and talked the other day, we talked about a few of this sort of stuff. I'm interested in a few weird and wonderful things, like, why do humans behave the way they do? What drives our behaviors? What's the nature of moral responsibility, free will? Do we have a soul? Those sort of philosophical, neuroscientific, and physical science type of conversations. There's things I'm interested in at the minute. My interest might change again in a year or two, but
You're already looking for trouble. We've never even finished episode 1. You're already looking for trouble by asking some of these complex, these these complicated questions. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, again, you can see already that there's quite a few different. The backgrounds are completely different that we all have, and we all have different views. But I think one of the best things I've enjoyed about our conversation. So maybe I'll just segue a little bit because I know we this conversation, this initial pilot is a bit of an introduction of ourselves to others, and not necessarily start having the conversations around the things that we want to talk about, because that would be a bit plenty for most people to kick off with. But I think it's important to point out the fact that our backgrounds are all completely different. It's very clear. We've all got very different views and very different experiences and very different ways of looking at life. And I think that's been the most interesting thing about the conversations we've had. First of all, I can automatically say I'm the most misaligned. Me, I'm not a doctor, please, Biko. You doctor people. You know what I mean? Una doctor. Now when they do your doctor things. Me, I'm misaligned already on that one. But in terms of just the way we look at life.
So I've got to say, hello, Cross. So, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, stop trying to be. Is the word humble, or is that what's the word? No. I think although we are, doctors, there's none of these things that we learned in medical training, or in fact, even university training. Or in fact, I did all of my training in Nigeria, from not that I did kindergarten, but all of it. And there was no history, there was the little history that I learned was just totally perverted. I remember that it was in history class that I had in primary school. I didn't do history in secondary school, but I remember clearly being told that Mungo Park discovered, River Niger. David Livingstone, he discovered Lake Tanganyika, the Victoria Falls, and all of this. Ferdinand Magellan circumnavigated. You know what I mean? All of those. It was totally Eurocentric, So there isn't anything actually that we are going to be discussing on this platform that has been taught to us in secondary, as a result of our medical training, or in your case, the humanities. There's nothing at all. So it's all about interest. I think that we have arrived at this point, different trajectories, different interests in history, in philosophy. It's just because we have got, shall I say, inquisitive minds, and just people who are not willing to accept the dominant narrative. We question things, and we think, why we're here, and yes, everybody believes in God if you're Nigerian, but sometimes you might ask, but how about I don't know, or I'm not sure, or I don't believe, is that valid? So
yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that nothing.
Yeah, we're already
We
misaligned.
haven't
I'm
arrived
sorry.
here because of.
I'm sorry, we're already misaligned on this one. Nope, misalignment. I'm calling it.
So
We're
can I
misaligned here.
just add to what Ijabula said a lot? Because,
Go for it.
So
Go
if
for
I
it.
can, I'm not sure Jab and Farouk might consider being a fully fledged doctor anyway, because I'm a psychiatrist and I don't know where
Another misalignment. Wow.
Right. So just to put that in there, that there are all kinds of misalignments here. Whether the proper doctors might consider a psychiatrist to be one, I'm not sure. But let's just put that out there.
I consider you to be a proper doctor, double qualified, a general practitioner, and then a psychiatrist. With an interest in forensic psychiatry, bringing all of that scientific training to bear on philosophy, plus a blend of the Yoruba heritage, and just to make it even more complex for some of our audience.
You've missed out my Urobo heritage.
The Fulani meats from Ilorin, so
yes.
No, I mean, but I mean, I'll take it a little bit back. I'm going to push back a little bit on this one. I'm sorry. I'm going to push back slightly on the first thing about about even misalignment based on the backgrounds, I would say that the idea that education or professional qualifications, and I'm going raw on this one, so I want to apologize in advance to
We're going to
all
the
three of
jugular.
you, but I'm going straight to it. That the idea that for some reason that some kind of educational qualification or experiential qualification within a very specific field makes someone more um, competent or even intellectually capable is completely wrong. I completely disagree with that. I don't think necessarily that being a doctor in this context, right, necessarily puts someone at in a higher level of technical, intellectual, philosophical capability. It just simply doesn't. So, in my experience, I've seen quite a few people who have doctorates, and that's from a PhD research level, who are not particularly very intelligent. They're just diligent. They just kept doing the same thing over and over and over, and they carried on to the end. And I've seen, a couple of doctors who are doctors from a medicinal perspective, who are again not particularly intelligent. I also know people who are also from the background of, from my sort of field, where they are more analytical by background, who are not very, very intelligent, and they're really high up. Are you very smart? No, they just happen to either graft their way to the top by being able to talk very slickly or whatever. And this is one of the things as well that I think I really want us to touch on. But again, first episode, let's not overeat it. But I want us to still talk a little bit about this one, because this is a fundamental conversation that we're having. And I think this is important, about the importance of analytical and intellectual capability over credential capability, where we look very often to these credentials. We look to people who have got, PhDs, master's degrees, doctorates, who got bachelor's degrees even. And then we say, oh, well, because somebody has got some sort of qualification, they've got a Prince 2 thing in Agile or whatever. And then we look to people with qualifications, and this happens everywhere. This happens, it's not even just like a small thing, it's big. We look through across the world where people have said somebody has run a business before, therefore they can become president. No, the fact that you run a business doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a competent leader for a different type of organization. But we apply this, and it's a fallacy. There's a fallacy. I can't remember what the fallacy is called. I'm definitely not going to say that now without knowing exactly what it is. But there's a fallacy around that, around competence, around someone's ability to be able to deliver competently in a specific field means that they're able to deliver in other things, or we trust them to be able to deliver on other things. And it translates when we look in through to the elections fairly recently in other countries, right? I'm not saying one way or the other which one works or which doesn't. That's a different level of conversation. But it's just the idea, the general idea about competence is linked to somebody's credentials. I don't agree. I don't know what you guys think about this one, because this is obviously highly contentious, because I'm coming here as the most misaligned from the doctorate.
So let me run with this one. Let me run with this one, because I mean, okay. So I think we were going to keep this to be we were just going to make this an introductory session, but I think we could maybe talk about this a bit for the rest of the few minutes that we've got today. So I would agree with you completely. I don't think that certificates and credentials equal education, because we know many certificated fools, if I can use that language, and so one of the other things that we have often talked about, and we did touch on this, didn't we, last time we met? We did say that when a child is born, you can think of a child as a blank slate, even though Yomi quickly challenged me on that. Yomi, I mean, yes, he didn't agree that it was a blank slate, because, say, for instance, I'm going to preempt it because I know what he's going to say. But if a child is born and that child, because of his DNA or chromosomal thing, let's say the child has, say, like Down syndrome, for instance, we might not expect that child to have the same intellectual capacity as someone different. Or let's say the child was asphyxiated during childbirth and it was a very difficult labor, and his brain was the child's brain was starved of oxygen, that child is not going to have the same, I don't know whether the right word is opportunity, mental capacity, perhaps, as somebody who was unaffected. So to even say that a child, when they are born, is a blank slate is not totally correct. But I've put that caveat there. So where I'm going with this, though, is that nobody, when we're born, it's a clean slate in the sense of whatever else we learn is a matter of socialization and acculturation, if that makes sense. And education has to be seen in that framework as well. And therefore, one of the problems that we have in Africa is that we have adopted education and culture that is alien to us without actually asking, does this thing suit our situation, or knowledge is universal. It's an accumulation of human knowledge, and quite a lot of the times, in Europe we find a situation where they appropriate every single knowledge and say that it's European civilization, everybody else is backward and barbaric. But so there's all of that knowledge. What we have failed to do, I think, in Africa is thinking, how might we use this knowledge in a way that solves our problem, that is useful to us. But I'll leave it there because I think it's important others have a say, have a go. Sorry.
Of course. Yemi, have you got any thoughts about that one?
Yes, I think I do. In some ways, strongly align with what has been said, certainly by yourself and by Jab, and in other ways, kind of have a slightly different view. So, my view around it would be that I agree with you that there's nothing about someone holding a certificate in any discipline at all. So, that grants them or gives you the confidence that they might be competent in a general sense. Okay, I think that's self-evident. However, I don't think holding a certificate either suggests that it means that they're not intellectual, put it that way. So what it is that you get a certificate for a particular thing. Okay, so all a certificate of a doctor tells me about you is that perhaps you've got some competence around practicing medicine. That's all it tells me. And it's very good at telling that, to be fair. If someone holds a pilot certificate that, they can fly a plane, you can be confident that they probably can fly a plane. But that's all you can be confident about, their ability, that they can fly a plane. It doesn't tell you anything else. It doesn't tell you about, whether they'll be a good husband or, whether they can be a nice neighbor or whether they can tidy their room. So and that brings me to my own understanding of what intelligence is, because I think that word tends to get used quite loosely, and I think it's hard. We've never been able to define it. I've looked into the literature around this to an extent, and we can't really define what that word means. And I think that's very important for us
Intelligence, you mean?
Yes, in a sort of scientific, measurable sense. So we can define it in a sort of conversational sense. But you know how science is. Then you think, okay, we want to test this. But as soon as you want to test something, then you've got to kind of scientifically define it, and then that becomes a problem. However, there's a measure of intelligence that's kind of generally accepted within psychometric circles to be representative of some form, at least some form of general ability, and then it's the sort of IQ test.
Fundamentally,
but there's still a lot of critique around, how it's administered, what it means. So it's not a settled matter at all. But just to summarize, my view on that would be, I totally agree that the certificate doesn't confer anything beyond what the certificate says. So if it says you're a pilot, that's all it tells me about you, that you can fly a plane. It doesn't tell me anything else. And so all the doctor certificate tells you about someone is they can practice medicine. That's it. But so whatever else people are, as Jabba said, is a combination of all kinds of things. The culture, the education, the people they run into, the conversations they have, their genes, their temperament. It's a mismatch of a lot of things. That's my view.
I'm curious to hear what Just Farouk thinks about this one, about the, because essentially it's like and the reality is people do hold these credentials to higher esteem. So when people have a more advanced degree or advanced qualification, it tends to change people's perception about someone's intellectual prowess and general societal status. That's just the reality about things, right? Well, when you have a doctor attached to your name, you're a bit more prestigious than someone who doesn't have a doctor attached to their name. Doesn't matter what kind of doctor that means. Is it PhD? Is it honorary? Is it an actual doctor in terms of medical science? You know, MP. I forget the words, and I'm not going to hold myself to that. But in terms of medical doctor, you know, being a medical doctor, um, they're all completely different. But there's different levels of status that are attached to having these titles to your name, having a master's degree. I haven't got a doctorate, I've got a master's degree. But with my master's degree, I understand the difference between how people look at me when I say I have a master's degree versus when someone else doesn't have one, if you know what I mean. And you definitely know what I mean. Again, I'm sat in this room misaligned with doctors, so the doctors know what I'm talking about, right? And I'm curious to understand that in your view, just for around this particular conversation about the link between intellectual prowess and intellectual capability and perceived social status from titles and things like that. How do you? What is your general? Before we go into specifics, what is your general thoughts and opinion around that, based on the conversations we've already had?
Could I make a quick point before Farouk does this?
Go for it.
Because I think Farouk is interested in socials, or the social aspect. So please, Farouk, take into account what I'm going to say. Now, following on from what Yemi said earlier about if somebody has a medical degree, or let's say he's a pilot, we know he can fly a pilot, but nothing more than we can. We know he can fly sorry, he can fly a pilot. He can fly a plane. We don't know whether that person, we can't say anything else outside that. Now, socially, we get this quite a lot with celebrities, right? People, okay, so this person is a celebrity. Maybe he's good at singing. Maybe he is good at football or volleyball or, something, right? Why do they bring them all the time to come and talk to us about politics and who you should vote and who you shouldn't vote for and all that kind of business, right? Or to talk about, let's say, a moral subject, right? Why? And then you also get this with well, I'll just use one example now. There's a second example that escapes me. So, and that example is, I can't remember, but Farouk, maybe you can speak about, okay, billionaires. That's the other one. That's the other one. So we get billionaires, and somehow we assume that because this person has £1 billion or hundreds of billions somewhere, they are qualified to talk about how day-to-day living. Do you know what I mean? Right? So I don't feel like they are qualified. Yes, the person has £1 billion, but that's about it. But that itself is not a statement on whether this person can manage knows a thing or two about, let's say, I don't know, COVID vaccines or public health or anything at all. So Farouk, I'll let you go with that.
I mean, thank you, Cross, Jab, and Yemi. I think on this issue there is broad-based agreement. But listening to Cross, he raises a few related issues that we need to unpack. I mean, what I heard is whether or not certificates were a surrogate for intelligence. I mean, the emphatic answer to that is somewhere there. Clearly, as Yemi said, there's difficulty in there isn't clear consensus on what the definition of intelligence is. But for most degrees, the higher you go, the more rigorous and the more level of critical thinking that's required for you to engage and for you to get through. So we could say it does give a surrogate. I mean, the higher you go, there is however loose, a relationship between that and your level of problem solving, logic, and reasoning and critical thinking. But our certificate is not the reason we're qualified to be here. Part of the whole idea of this podcast is to, in a sense, bring the African beer parlor or space under a tree, or when I was in university, the shade under a tree where we go to read newspapers, to bring those conversations to a worldwide platform. And what qualifies us to be here is our interest and our curiosity and our perspective. So in a sense, yes, our medical qualifications, master's qualifications are not, it's not the reason we are here. It doesn't qualify us to be here. This is a village square where everyone with a view, with a thought, with an idea of reality, of truth, that is willing to share, to be challenged, to embrace new thought and reason and learn is welcome. So from that perspective, yes, qualifications don't matter and they don't qualify anyone to be here or out of here. So we encourage everyone online to comment, to engage, and every one of us here. Now, having said that, do qualifications give social status? Do they bring influence, wealth, power? Absolutely yes. Justified? Maybe, maybe not sometimes. I want to say yes or no to that. So I would want a qualified pilot to drive, to fly the plane when next I'm going on my holiday. And I would want to be sure they went to a flying school where that's rigorously checked. And for that task, it's absolutely essential for me and my family and my friends and anyone who gets on that plane. Similarly, if a relative or a loved one had cancer, I would want someone who's trained in that, who's qualified in that, to listen to them, formulate treatment plan, and solve that problem for them. The global marketplace, again, we talk about reality and values, respect certain qualifications and certain, influencer, celebrity, and that gives them power, that gives them following. That may be a reality I don't like, but it's a reality that exists. And so, yes, cross qualifications come with social dividends, they come with financial dividends, they come with influence and power, and people then leverage this to make money, to influence politics, and it is what it is. And so that's my take on it. I'm happy to be.
I need to push back on you on this one. So I think fundamentally one of the key things one of the key things that I think I personally am against is status quo ideologies. Anything that involves what you just said right now, it is what it is for me, is a no-go. Nope. I lie. I'm not agreeing. I do not want it is what it is to be. It is what it is. Now, there are some areas in which this applies, and then it'll be interesting to hear the conversations evolve into other things. Like, I mean, because we've talked about quite a few things over over those 6 hours that we had, and a few different conversations that I've had with Jab. But there's some things around intersexual dynamics I'm quite interested to talk about. I definitely find the relationships between men and women to be something that I find very interesting. Men as well as men, how we look at things. But then into social dynamics are also quite important, which we're talking about now. But I would say for me, I push against the fact that things are what they are doesn't necessarily mean that things should be what they should be. And then we should probably, and this is my opinion, obviously, this is me in my misalignments, pushing my own viewpoints, right? That maybe we should change some of these ideas and some of these viewpoints. And one of them would be the idea that, and to Jab's point, Jab raised this already earlier, that the idea that someone has got they're billionaire or whatever, they're rich, they're successful, etc., Okay, congratulations. Well done. So what? How does this translate into this other thing that we're now making you the chief of, that you have no experience in being able to do and no capability or competence or proof of either within that field? No. And this applies to, and this goes back to my initial point about this. And I was saying this obviously because this is us talking about it. So it's easy for me to be able to point out to say, I've got 3 doctors in here for individuals within this conversation. I've got 3 doctors who've got that specific degree, but this applies across the field. That people have got extensive degrees, extensive experiences in different areas of work and competencies and scientific research, etc., and capabilities. And then we entrust these people. I'll give you an example. There's a classic thing that we talk about the plane, and then people say someone's having a heart attack, right? This is a joke, but it's not really. It's really it's an Jab. You already know what I'm talking about. This is an exemplification of what this issue is, where they'd say any doctors on the plane, someone's having a heart attack. There's 100 people raise up their hands and say, oh, yeah, we're all doctors. You know what I mean? And then like, no, someone's having a heart attack. Any doctor on the plane, only one guy says, yeah, me. But the reality is, people don't even really care. The fact that there are 10 doctors on the plane is sufficient for people to still look at those people as persons of interest and competence, even though the competence is not relevant to the situation at hand. And I think this is a challenge that we have in the world right now. It's a big issue. It's a bonus for me. It's a bonus for all of you on the call. It works for me because I go out there and I'll just go, yeah, well, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. People say, oh, yeah, that's great. And I can be able to get opportunities that other people can't get. But am I actually competent and capable sorry, go for it then. You're
sorry, I was just wondering if I could drop a thought on that point. And I think,
please go for it.
I think where the difficulty may arise with regards to working out is the question around competent to do what. And I think it doesn't always seem obvious at the time why someone's been chosen to do what. So like the billionaires we talk about, for example, or the celebrity, so if you think about how democracies work, democracies often are about numbers and about mobilization. So if there's someone who, for any reasons at all, it could even be that they're totally mad, but that their madness attracts 1 million people and calls their attention, they're going to have social power. Because at the end of the day, in a democracy, what you want is to get people's attention to begin with. And anyone who can do that, it doesn't matter how they get the ability to be able to do that. As I say, it could be that they're just plain mad, but if every time they turn on their computer, 1 million people log in, that's it, that's it. And I think that's where that competence comes from.
And Yemi, let me add quickly. You made the point about democracy, but it's also the way capitalism works. So if you can twerk on this live stream and you get 1 million views, then you're going to have influence. Our judgment or Cross's judgment on whether that was a worthwhile effect is irrelevant. The market has decided that it is relevant, and you occupy that space. You can then commercialize it and
so that's
use
another
it
form of
either to buy social capital or financial capital.
It looks like
okay,
Jobs.
We're getting engagement here.
It looks like Jobs got something.
We're getting engagement here.
Yeah. How can you see that?
So Isiaka says certification is an indicative capability to perform within a specialized discipline and should not be mistaken for intelligence. I would agree with that.
100%.
I would agree with that. So
100%.
yes, I would agree with that.
Isiaka, welcome to the video.
He said in one sentence, I think, what I have tried to say in 10.
Should we just read through the messages, the comments that we've got, just to give everybody equal level of import? So the first message that we got was brilliant from Mr. Proficiency. Thank you for that. That's that. Not quite sure where that was relevant to, but thank you for that contribution. We had Samuel Oshun saying expert bias. Yep, being great in one field doesn't translate into them being an expert in others. Coming back to the conversation we were having a bit earlier. Mikey B. Yeah, I agree. Don't want such ideological status quo propaganda like having pilots flying our planes. Yeah, Mike, I know what you're talking about. That's
fine. Bold. Well done.
And then we had the next one from Ishiaka Yinka Ogunusi. Certification is an indicative capability to perform within a specified discipline and should not be mistaken for intelligence. Very similar to what Samuel Oshun was talking about as well. Very similar concept, right? And it's just saying the same thing. But yeah, go on. You guys can
yeah.
chop it up on that.
So I think what I was going to say is, look, if look at our country, for instance, Nigerians are like the most educated people people around. I think one of the most educated demography in the US, and I believe in the UK as well. So
UK, correct.
And the average Nigerian probably has about what two, maybe three degrees and that kind of thing. Okay, but then look at our country. Basic problems we have not been able to sort out. I mean, we will come to why later on during the course of future podcasts and all that. But to me, just having certificate, because to me the purpose of education is that, first of all, it should make you think outside the box. It should make you question dominant narrative or received wisdom, but more importantly, it should solve your problem, right? If your education does not allow you to sort out your problem, then I'm sorry, you're not, the education is not useful.
Does it
So
also matter
I
how
think
you
the thing that we haven't said about, that we haven't mentioned here just now, is that one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is that we want to be able to share ideas, and hopefully if we have a big following, the whole idea is helping people to have a platform where they can, there's no where people can think freely, and these ideas hopefully can set up a chain reaction. So if one person is awake, wake the next person next to you. And even if we didn't do much, if we managed, for instance, to educate our children in the things that we're talking about on this platform, I think that would be great benefit, because I think that Africa is a sleeping giant. She needs to wake up. And we have these conversations every time, all the time, over dinner, when we go out for meals and all that kind of business. But I feel that the time has come for a platform like this where we can talk about these things, because beyond the philosophies and all that, I think we have got some important things to say, and I'm hoping that maybe this other people will find it useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jabs. And before we veer off this notion of intelligence, and because we've all, it's important to me, I'm very passionate about it, to always put the African ideas and concepts about things out there. So I'm Igala from Kogi State, very closely aligned to the Yoruba people. I schooled in Ilorin, Kwara State. And the notions of intelligence in my village, in my culture, it's about harmony. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about practical. It's about navigating the politics, the spiritual, the emotional, and the practical. It's not about certificates per se. And I think when you think about it, when you think about the life skills we use to navigate life, that probably properly captures, I mean, from our perspective, the the notion of intelligence. In my culture, it will be wisdom, it will be patience, it will be harmony, it will be tact. It will be all the soft skills that are not often highlighted, as Crosswood may love to hear, in a certificate, which from that perspective is hard. Tick, 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 tick. You've got this level, you've got that level. So I guess it's a balance of both. I just thought I should put that out there.
Thanks, Farouk. And I think I've got some sort of I'm not sure if it might come across as a red pill on this. There's just some kind of take the thought slightly further. Because I've always, maybe not always, but I've kind of come to be settled in the idea that intelligence is a difficult concept. It's a difficult concept because you can only define what it is against the task. So let's again use an example of something we are familiar with. I like football. I'm sure some of you don't, but I'm going to use the example anyway. So you've got two of the sort of best players of our time, and you know, if you go to a pub or a village square anywhere, people are arguing about who's the best player, Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi. And if you look at both of them, they're two very different type of players. Okay, and you can see that they're so very different that if you try to make one like the other one, it's not going to work. And I think a lot of what we find with regards to the underperformance of Africa, having taken all the points that people have made here, which I agree with, the education.
Yeah,
and all that
I mean, we're kind of we're losing you a little bit. We're losing you a little bit.
Right.
There we go. You're back.
Have you still got
Fire
me?
away. So
Okay. Sorry. So I'm not sure where you kind of lost me, but what I was saying is that I do believe that intelligence needs to be judged and marked against the specified tasks, and that's where it becomes very difficult, because you might have 10 different people aiming at 10 different things, and then it becomes difficult to judge who's intelligent and who isn't. So I was giving the example using football, like Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi, who's the best player, and people argue this all the time, but they're two very different players. But what most people agree is that both of them are in the top of the game, right? The question is who's number one, who's number two. That's the argument, but we agree that both of them are on top. But they're two very different players, and if you try to make one the other, it's likely to fail, because they're so different what each of them does, how they do it. And I think this is one of the things that we've kind of had difficulties with as Africans, that the world as it is today seems to have been built and framed in the image of the European. And culturally, there's a lot of difference, okay? And I think as long as we as a people want to measure up and design our societies like European societies, and measure what success means, like in terms of European ideals, I think we'll be playing catch up for a long time. So it seems to me that there's a reinvention that needs to come, that needs to be fundamental, in the sense of who am I, and what is it that what is it that defines me? What is it that I'm at the top of the tree of? And I think that's where this reawakening, at least it needs to be a component of it, if not all of it, but it at least needs to be a component of it. A fish will never do as well as a monkey climbing trees. And I'm not suggesting that fundamentally we lack some skills that Europeans don't have. I think it's the nature of human life. I cannot be Farouk. Forget it. When we were in school, I wouldn't even try to. If I tried to be like him, it wouldn't work. I wouldn't be able to do it, and I would probably not be able to even make it through. It's self-discovery. It's discovering ourselves. I think in many ways, Africans have lost. There's a lot we've lost. Language, culture, the sort of personality. And as someone who pays a bit of attention, certainly in my work, to the psyche, you see this a lot. People who lose their identity, they almost lose everything. It can be devastating. And I think as a people, so fundamentally. I mean, we mentioned this at the dinner table the other day, that there are African communities where, people are going to the farm in the hot sun wearing tie and suits effectively. It's just not conducive to what they're doing. It's not conducive to the weather. And I know that's a kind of small thing, but I think it probably references a wider sense of loss of identity that comes with this. And I don't know what the answers are, but I'm just putting a finger on what I think is one of the issues, which is that rediscovering what it is to be within an African community. Again, the different African communities would be different, but as Farouk said, what do we, if we're in, is it Angba, or what was it? What who are we? What does life mean to us? And those sort of stuff. So that's just my reflection around that, to say, that can be a good starting point as well.
I mean, you've done some very interesting points, and I think it's necessary for me to read some of the not super chats, the comments that have come through. Okay, they're coming really quickly. Okay, so the first one is that certification is an indicative capability to perform within a specified discipline. I think we've done this already, so I'll move to the next one. Intelligence, as very well articulated by Yemi, is indeed multidimensional. Hence, science might struggle to reach a universal scoring criteria for intelligence. It's an interesting point. I don't know if I 100% agree with that, and we'll come to that in a minute, because I'm going to come back with a bit of a rebuttal to your idea, Yemi, about the intellectual centralization of intellect, essentially. I like Yami's reinvention, as he puts it. The unlearning. A lot of things we have learned that we need to unlearn as a people. I agree, 100% agree with that. K Celestial sends a smile, and then we've got, I call it, I mean it. Okay, I get it. Thank you, Ishaka, Inka. Good to see you've definitely made my day very easy with the comments with this one. I'll come back on one thing.
Just interject quickly?
Of course.
Yeah. So just looking at the clock, I think we've gone 17 minutes past the hour. I think that I know this is a test run, but we probably want to be careful about making it too long, because for obvious reasons, obviously. But thoughts, I don't know what others think.
Are you on mute, Farouk?
I agree.
Cross, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I agree with Ijabla completely.
Yeah, I agree as well. So we can, I think we can look at this as a test run, a very interesting conversation that we've had, setting our stalls out, getting people to know who we are, starting that kind of conversation about what we're trying to achieve and what we intend to do, and then we can look at the next one. And if we make this, a relatively consistent approach, we've got quite a few people who have been in and out of the chat, but they're fairly consistent. We've got people who are engaged. And if they like what we're doing, we can come here again fairly frequently, come every couple of, every week, same time. If you guys are all for it, we'll all come same time every week. We'll set this up so people know when to expect us to come and join it and have this conversation. The next conversation
7
that we'll
p.m.
have,
every Sunday.
7 p.m. every Sunday, if everyone's up for that. I'm 100% up for that. I think
Let's do it.
it's perfectly good for me, because I am definitely a Sunday evening guy. That works for me. Saturday evening doesn't work for me. I'm not going to be here. I'm going to do something else. So if we and just on this, before we even jump into that, the next conversation that we said that we'll talk about, just for everyone else's own opinion, viewpoints and perspective, is that we're going to talk about exploring that Africa's place in the shifting global dynamic, shifting global order, essentially. And then we're moving from looking at the geopolitical power play across all of that through to economic shifts. So it's all of that concept about how we're looking at how we're making money within those places, but the things that happen from a political perspective, but also to defining the biggest trends that we're seeing. And then we're going to have a conversation about how Africa can navigate, engage, and benefit from these trends and these things that we see that are happening there. Again, we might possibly change the conversation because we might be misaligned. Maybe there's a misalignment in the conversation around what we want to achieve. Maybe we want to do something else. Maybe we want to talk about religion. Maybe we want to talk about the importance, like we had today. The importance of credentials against capabilities, etc. We could talk about something else. Those of you who are already in the chat today, who have popped in to bless us with your time. If you've got views and opinions, please just leave your comments. Say what you think. Say what you want. Give your opinions about what you want to hear us talk about based on what you've heard already. And I'm looking forward to it. And I know we're all looking forward to hearing your opinions and views and creating a podcast and a set of interesting conversations and arguments and misalignments that works for everybody else as well. Does anybody have anything to just throw in?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's logged on to support us. Thank you.
Same here. Thanks, everyone. This is when I was young, we had a Sunday tonic at 9 p.m. Sunday Olise. Do you remember? Is it Sunday?
Sunday Olise.
Is it Sunday Olise or Sunday somebody? Yeah. So for all those who are on, make this your 7 p.m. Village masquerade meeting. Let's chat.
Tales by moonlight.
Let's be misaligned. Let's disagree. Let's embrace controversy. Let's learn. Let's evolve. Let's add our voice to the global discourse. Nothing highfalutin. Just no certifications required. Everyone is qualified. Everyone is an expert. Just share your views. Be open. Be willing to be challenged. Agree to disagree. Agree to be misaligned.
Agreed. Agree to be misaligned. Yemi, Jab, Just Baruch. It's been a great conversation. Have a great evening. Everyone else in the chat, have a fantastic time.
Thank
Have a
you.
good evening.
Bye.
Misaligned, signing
Thank
out.
you.
Yeah.